All right, what we're going to be looking at in this lesson is the bureaucracy and how that fits into the executive branch. All right. A bureaucracy has hierarchical authority structure, which means that power flows from the top down and responsibility flows from the top up. So this would be like looking at a pyramid. You've only got a few people at the top who are bossing around a whole bunch of people at the bottom. And it's not all the people at the bottom that are doing most of the work. All right. The bureaucracy is predicated upon the following concepts. One is task specialization. If you're working within the bureaucracy and you have a specific job, you're going to do that job over and over and over and over again, and you're going to become an expert at that. But it does not necessarily mean that you're going to know about anything else that goes on within that organization. That's one of the reasons why the bureaucracy gets such a bad rap in the concept of red tape. Is because people only know what their job is, and then they've got to transfer you to somebody else to get another portion of that job done, or whatever that you're trying to get done. So, because it can be a little bit cumbersome for those individuals who are trying to maybe interact with the government, is why the bureaucracy has such a bad rep, and a lot of that has to do with task specialization. Also, another reason why the bureaucracy gets a bad rap is the idea of extensive rules. They have rules for everything, and that is to try and make sure that there's a consistent application of the rules to everybody, and that everybody is getting the same type of service. All right. The bureaucracy is based upon the merit principle, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. But the merit principle is the idea that individuals within the bureaucracy have their job because they are truly skilled and qualified to be able to do that job. And it's also based upon the idea of impersonality, which means that they don't care about your situation. They don't care about what's going on in your life. They're going to execute the policies as has been given to them, and they're going to do based upon the extensive rules that they have. So people within the bureaucracy aren't really going to listen to sob stories and things like that. They're going to do their job as it's been laid out by the letter of the law. All right. So when we look at the civil service, prior to the use of the civil service, governmental hiring was done through the process of patronage, which we talked a little bit about in the last lesson. Patronage, which can also be known as the spoils system, is hiring and promotion system based upon political reasons rather than on merit or competence. So unfortunately, when you get a patronage system, you have a lot of people who don't know how to do their job that are in really, really important governmental positions. So in order to try and get unqualified people out of the government and to put people into the government who actually knew what the heck they were doing, patronage is made illegal. And it was ushered out with an act known as the Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1883. This act created the civil service as we know it today. In order to keep the integrity of the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which is designed to get people to take a civil service test to get a job within the government, the Hatch Act was passed. The Hatch Act forbids one from engaging in partisan politics while on duty. So, once you leave work, you're more than welcome to put on your Democrat or Republican t-shirt. You're more than welcome to go campaign for people and wear your campaign buttons and do all those different types of things. However, while you're at your job, while you're at work, you do not have the right to engage in political activities. And remember, this is within the civil service. All right, our bureaucracies are populated with employees who are part of the civil service program. All right, the civil service is designed to hire and promote members of the bureaucracy on the basis of merit and to create a nonpartisan government service. So the nonpartisan part comes from the Hatch Act, and the promotion based upon merit and being hired based upon merit goes along with the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which requires the passage of a civil service exam. One of the organization that's responsible for hiring within most federal agencies is the Office of Personnel Management. All right, employees are rated from a GS1 to a GS18, which means general schedule. So 1 are very low-level positions, 18 is a very high-level position. All right, people who are ranked from 16 to 18 are known as senior executive service. All right, so let's look at some of the organizations that exist within the bureaucracy. One of the main ones that we look at here is the concept of the Independent Regulatory Agency. These agencies have the responsibility of making and enforcing rules designed to protect the public interest in regards to a particular sector of the economy. So we look at some of these different organizations that exist. The Federal Reserve Board is going to look at monetary policy and things like that within the United States. The National Labor Relations Board, they're going to be looking at labor issues, pay, safe work conditions, things like that. The Federal Communications Commission, they're going to they license wavelengths for radio. They license for cell phone companies. They censor to make sure that appropriate words are being used on television and on the radio and things like that. So the FCC is designed to look at broadcast concepts. Federal Trade Commission, they're going to look for and make sure that fair trade concepts are happening throughout the United States. And then the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to look at a lot of the stock market, and they are going to look at business mergers to make sure that monopolies aren't being formed or that unfair business practices aren't being practiced throughout the United States. Okay, so these are really powerful groups, and they have a lot of power over private industry. And even though the bureaucracy falls under the power of the president has very little control over these groups. And the big reason why is that the people that work in these agencies are probably going to outlast the president who's in power. So, and the president's pretty aware of that, because you may be president for 4 years. They may work there for 30. So that's going to provide them with a lot more leeway over what goes on within those institutions rather than what the president wants them to do. All right. We also have things known as government corporations. Government corporations provide a service that could be handled by the private sector, but at cheaper rates than the consumer would pay in the private sector. So you got to think about it. Post office. I can buy a stamp for like 40 cents and send a piece of mail from here to California. Now that is a really, really long way. You generally can't send something for over 3,000 miles for 40-something cents. You couldn't drive it there for that cheap. So knowing that that is something that exists, that's a government corporation that provides us with a cheaper service. Amtrak, trains, there are other people that can build trains, but since the government is involved in that and they can heavily subsidize it, they can make tickets cheaper. Same thing with satellite communications. I could technically build my own satellite and send it into space. However, it's going to be much cheaper for me to rent satellite time off of the government who's already launched a satellite into space for me. All right. We also have independent executive agencies. These are all agencies in the government that do not include cabinet departments, regulatory commissions, and government corporations. And these include the General Service Administration, the National Science Foundation, which is responsible for a lot of government research programs and things like that, and then the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So they all have specific things that they're doing, but they're not really government corporations. They don't regulate anything. They're just kind of government agencies that are kind of doing their own thing. All right, so let's look at how the bureaucracy implements policy in the United States. So policy implementation is the stage between the establishment of a policy and then the results that we get from the implementation of that policy. Implementation includes at minimum the following things: a creation of a new agency or assignment of a new responsibility to an old agency. So if I create a policy and I can put it with one of the agencies that already exist, then I'm going to do so. But if there isn't an agency that exists yet, then I'm going to create a new agency and have them oversee what's going on with this new policy. All right. I then have to translate the policy goals into operational rules. I have to have a strict set of standard operating procedures to know exactly what the heck I'm supposed to do if I am somebody who's working with them in the bureaucracy and I'm supposed to be implementing these rules. All right. I also have to develop guidelines for the program and coordination of resources and personnel to achieve the intended goals. So I got to know where I'm doing this. I got to know who I've got to be able to do this. I've got to know what resources I have. I need to know what resources I need. And I've got to be able to get all of that stuff together in order to be able to try and implement that policy. Here are some of the reasons why implementation fails. Poor program design. If the design of the program is poor at the foundation, then it's not going to do anything. It's like a house. If I build a house on a cracked foundation, then that house is going to fall apart. All right, so I got to make sure that the main structure of the program actually makes sense and that there's some validity to it. I've also got to make sure that it's clear. All right, that would be like a teacher giving you an assignment and you don't really understand the directions and they didn't really do anything to explain it to you as far as how that goes on, and that's going to lead to inevitable failure. All right, a lack of resources. Once again, you got to know your people, you got to know what stuff you've got, you got to know what all of those things are, and if you don't have those things, you've got to be able to procure them. And if you don't have the necessary resources, then the implementation of policy is going to fail. All right, you got to have a good administrative routine. So if there's a lack of standard operating procedures, then the implementation of the policy is going to fail. If people don't know what they're supposed to do in every plausible situation, then there's going to be a lot of things that go wrong. All right. One of the things that you do need in order to stop it from failing is administrative discretion. This is the authority of an administrative actor to select among various responses to a given problem. Those who use more discretion are sometimes known as street-level bureaucrats, and they are termed that way as such because of their ability to listen to the public. All right, so if you're an everyday, regular person who's working within the bureaucracy, you're going to have zero to no flexibility in what you do. However, your manager may have a little bit more flexibility, and that's why they're known as street-level bureaucrats, because they can listen to you, they can understand what's going on, and they can kind of see the gray in some of the rules that exist. And then we also have the issue of fragmentation. If it's fragmented and everybody's doing different things and those things don't line up together, then the implementation of that policy is definitely going to fail. All right. Regulation. Regulation is something that the government is involved in various different ways throughout the United States. Regulation is the use of governmental authority to control or change some practice in the private sector. So let's look at some of the ways that regulation is done. The SEC regulates the merging of companies. Just recently, AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile. The SEC told them that they couldn't do that because it would have created an unfair market advantage for AT&T, and they would have dominated too much and would have been able to possibly put themselves in the role of being a monopoly. All right, affirmative action programs are designed to try and bring about more racial equality within the United States. So there are things that have to do with hiring practices and admission practices to schools to try and break some of the historical cycles that go along with minorities within the United States. The EPA puts restrictions on what you can throw away, what can be recycled, all of those different types of things. The NHTSA, which is the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, they're going to set rules for the safety of different things on the road, speed limits and things like that. And then we can also have the Department of Transportation, which can require pollution control, energy-saving things for cars, and safety devices like seatbelts. Right. Regulation can be accomplished through command and control policy as well as incentive systems. So a command and control is you're going to do this or I'm going to punish you. An incentive is, hey, you should do this because if you do it, I'll totally give you this awesome thing. All right. Deregulation is the idea that the government should lift some of the restrictions that exist on business, industry, and professional activities. And there are a variety of reasons for why that is argued, and we'll kind of look at that more when we look at parties and things like that. With the use of regulation and deregulation, the bureaucracy can be known as quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial. And the reason that they're quasi-legislative is because within some of the holes of these policies that have been provided to them, they get to make their own rules to determine how they want to actually implement that. So since they're creating some of their own rules, that means they're a little bit legislative. And they're quasi-judicial because they can kind of pick and choose the types of things that they want to enforce, which means that they get to determine whether or not there's a legitimacy behind those rules. So this is why the bureaucracy a lot of times is looked at as being the fourth branch of government, or they're an unofficial branch of government that really has a lot of power with what goes on in our society. All right. So we also have the idea of the iron triangle. When agencies, groups, and committees all depend on one another and are in close, frequent contact, they form something known as an iron triangle. These can also be known as sub-governments that generally agree on policy issues and work together for the passage of mutual beneficial legislation. All right, this is what an iron triangle looks like, and it can go in both directions. All right, so let's use a brief example here real quick. So if I'm an interest group that is trying to get more money for parks within my neighborhood, if I'm an interest group, I can lobby the bureaucratic agency, so I can go this way, and I can get them, like the EPA, to start trying to mandate that more parks be included within the system. All right, that bureaucratic agency can then use the concept of, look, you're going to benefit your constituency, which means that they're going to vote for you. And then the legislative committee may then use that opportunity to then assess what's going on, to create policy to make sure that more parks are put in place, or make appointments to other places to try and get those things to happen. All right, so that's how we can go in this direction. We can also go in the other direction. Same example as far as parks go. Interest groups can make contributions or provide information to legislators to show, hey, this is why it would be a really good idea to do that. They can then write laws, they can create budgets, or change jurisdictions of bureaucratic agencies to make sure that they oversee that that's happening. the bureaucratic agencies can then create programs, contracts, and regulations that help out what the interest group wants. So we can see the same thing happen going in the other direction. And we can really start this process in any one of these places, the interest groups, the bureaucratic agency, or the legislative committee.